Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here from the Meaford Church of Christ with the View from the Pew. And today I want to talk about hashtag toxic culture. Okay, and that is as opposed to hashtag toxic masculinity or even hashtag toxic femininity, right? Being male or female, that's not the problem. And in fact, just let me say this before we kind of get into some of the other things I want to talk about. Pointing to half the population of the planet, either men or women, and saying you're the problem, that is not going to help anyone anywhere. All right? Furthermore, it isn't the problem, right? You've completely misdiagnosed the issue. The issue is not one of masculinity or femininity, and certainly not one of masculinity versus femininity. The problem is one of vice versus virtue. And as a culture and as a society, as Western culture in general, we have said vice is to be embraced and encouraged and expressed rather than virtue. In fact, virtue is to be rejected as puritanical and old-fashioned and restrictive, and we ought to do away with it. And when you do that, you can expect exactly the kinds of things that you see presenting themselves as problems in our world today. It's exactly what you would expect to happen if you did what I'm describing, which is reject virtue in favor of vice. All right, so let me delve into a couple of the ways in which we have done that. And the first one is we have told men for 50 years to reject true masculinity that involves dignity, being dignified and respectful, respecting women, protecting women, viewing them as something to be valued and cared for instead of something to be objectified and taken advantage of. Right? The culture has told men to do that. And then when they do the very thing that culture has told them they're supposed to do, all of a sudden they have negative consequences. All right? Now, furthermore, there's an extra layer here that has perhaps made this worse in more recent times, and that is we have told both men and women that they don't need to grow up. Okay? We have kids, okay, who are in school. We have taken the university experience and used it to extend adolescence. So now we have grown adults, but we tell them you're still kids and you can still act like kids and you can still be irresponsible and foolish. You don't have to grow up. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. What kids should be told, if they're going to go to university, that university is a job. Right? It is now your job to gain the skills you need to succeed in life. That's what university ought to be about, right? Instead of a time to shirk responsibility and continue your high school teenage lifestyle, right? That's a huge failure. And when you tell grown adults that they don't have to act like grown adults, they can continue to be children, then they're going to act like children and you're going to have this stupid, foolish, insane things that we see going on in universities today. And we're going to even extend those now into early adulthood. All right? The fact is, if you're 18, you're an adult, and you better grow up and learn to deal with life and not run around, drinking too much and being hungover and not going to class and just failing at all the things you ought to be doing in life. Look, at 18, you better take care of yourself. And yeah, hopefully you're able through that time to be going to school and gaining abilities that are going to serve you later. By the way, this is a whole different video in terms of what we take in university and how that's going to serve us or not later on in life. But continuing adolescence is a huge failure that is part of the problem that is mislabeled as toxic masculinity or toxic femininity. Number two, we have told men and women to abandon marriage as the only appropriate place for sexual activity. Okay, now we have exactly the results that you would expect if you tell people sexual activity is casual and it's just about self-fulfillment. And by the way, this is not a new argument. All the way back in 1 Corinthians, Paul responds to the argument that our sexual desires and sexual gratification is just like our physical desires for food. Hey, I'm hungry. The stomach's there because it needs to be fed. I should eat. Well, I've got other body parts and they want to be satisfied and I should just fulfill those as well. That's from 1 Corinthians, okay? And it was a lie back then and it's a lie today. Sexuality is something to be valued and something to be considered sacred. Right? And it should only be expressed between a committed couple within a marriage. Anything outside of that is going to cause problems. And so now we have problems with abortion, and we have problems with STDs, and we have rape culture, which is really just the normal regret that we should feel when we engage in sexuality in inappropriate ways. Of course you're going to feel regret. You did the wrong thing. We're hardwired as humans to regret stupid decisions, okay? And that's what you're feeling. It's not rape culture. It's nothing more than your natural inclination to feel guilt over stuff that's bad, all right? Objectification of women. Yeah, you've told men who do naturally have a stronger drive for sexuality and are more visually stimulated sexually than women are. You know, you've now told them that sex is just casual and they should do it however and whenever they can. All right, what results would you expect from that kind of a message, other than exactly the kind of unhealthy behaviors we see now all the time? Okay. Third, we've told men and women that they're exactly alike when they are clearly not. Anyone who has eyes can tell that they're not the same. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details, but go watch a Jordan Peterson video about males and females and see all of the differences. Not only are we physically different, right? Watch the Olympics, watch a weightlifting competition. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure that out, but pay attention to medical science and the fact that it says there are literally differences in men and women's brains. There are differences in hormone levels. There are differences in emotional responses. There are differences in our inclinations toward different fields. There are differences in, you know, just to pick on one example, men tend to want to climb, and to use Peterson's words, dominance hierarchies, okay? They want to be the best. They want to be the top of the heap. Women don't have as strong a drive for that. Some do, I get it. But statistically, okay, there are differences. And quit trying to pretend they're not there. And that, by the way, is going to be, well, we'll get to that point down the road. But one of the things our culture's doing all the time is completely trying to ignore reality in favor of some imagined utopia that doesn't exist. And when you ignore reality, that's going to harm you. Just like it would if you decided to cross the road and you ignored the reality that a car's coming. Guess what? That's pretty detrimental to your health. Well, that's true in general. Ignoring reality in favor of some imagined world that doesn't exist is always harmful. Okay, so we have to stop doing that. And one of the ways we have to stop doing that is by telling men and women that they're exactly the same. They're not. And we have to account for those differences when we interact with one another. We have to. All right? And so, you know, some of the exact things we talked about a few minutes ago. The sexual drive that males have, women don't have it in the same way, and they don't express it in the same way. By the way, I'm not saying women don't have a sex drive. They absolutely do. But it's not as strong, nor is it as stimulated in the same way as males. All right? And both of them are going to be more fulfilled sexually if they engage in sexual activities, again, inside of marriage. I know that was my last point, but that's part of the difference, okay, is part of why marriage works. We're designed by God to fit together, right? And I don't only mean anatomically, I mean emotionally and in every other way. Right. Finally, to kind of carry on with our suspension of reality, and that, I guess, is really my fourth point. We have now decided we have to go even further. It wasn't enough, okay, to tell everyone that what we really should do is just express all of our feelings. Whatever we feel, we should just do, right? Because people know that's not wise, all right? And so what we've said is, well, look, it seems like some people aren't getting our message. And so what we ought to do is get to them younger and younger and younger and younger. So let's go into kindergarten classes and grade 1 classes and grade 2 classes and start telling them that what the genitalia that you have doesn't have anything to do with your sex, with your gender. Okay, by the way, sex and gender, those are interchangeable terms. Do not come here and try to tell me, well, really, you know, gender is how you feel inside and sex is what you have in your pants. Baloney. Okay? We have DNA that indicates whether we are male or female. Deal with it, okay? And again, go back to all of those biological differences that exist, all right? I don't care what you feel about it, okay? There's a reality and then there's not reality. And if you are trying to imagine a world in which the reality around you can't be perceived and you're going to live outside of that, we call that delusion, right? We call that a mental disorder, right? I know people who think, hey, they're under attack, who think they're being spied on, who think all kinds of crazy things that are not accurate depictions of reality. And guess what? That's a mental problem, okay? And what we can't do is now force our kids, right, to buy into our suspension of reality. Number one, they're too smart for it, okay? And number two, as they get older and they start to feel peer pressure, and you do start making some headway with them, and you do start forcing them to suspend their knowledge of what's real and what's true, you don't help them, you only harm them. All right, and I've got to tell you a couple of quick illustrations that help to maybe make this point a little bit. I've got two quick stories here that I want to share with you. The first one is about my son Joel, who went to school, and I guess it was like grade 1 or 2, where they were exposed to the idea, and I don't know where it came from, whether it was one of the other kids that brought it up, whether it was addressed in the classroom setting. You know, I didn't get that far with him, and he really couldn't tell me, he was too young. But he said, "Dad, do you know, I heard today that boys could marry boys and girls could marry girls." I said, "Oh, what did you think about that?" He said, "Well, me and my friends talked about it after, you know, and we kind of realized that was stupid. Boys cannot marry boys," right? He said it just like that. You know, and I can't remember now if it was grade 1 or grade 2, but that was the conversation we had. And here's the thing. That little group of friends was too young to understand that we're supposed to suspend what we know to be true. We're supposed to ignore reality in favor of, you know, this collective delusion that it's politically correct to break out of. Right? They didn't know about the politically correct delusion, and so they were just like, yeah, that's stupid. Right? And I've got one more story to tell along these lines. We were in a situation, a public setting, where we were at a camp, and one of the kids at the camp was a person who had chosen to, he was a male, but he had chosen to dress and in some way act and adopt some mannerisms of a female. So he would often wear like tight pink shirts and a little tutu, and he would kind of walk a certain way. He, you know, have long hair and kind of flip it over his head like this. And so my little niece was watching this particular individual walk across the playground at the camp where we were. And as he walked by, you know, she stops. He's wearing, you know, a tutu and a pink t-shirt, and watches him walking along. And she watches him and watches him. And then she looks up and goes, "That's a boy." Right? And again, because she hasn't been informed yet that we're supposed to collectively suspend reality so that we can reinforce, I guess, someone else's delusion. Right? Well, listen, reinforcing delusions is not helpful. All right? Now, I'm not suggesting that if someone truly has a mental disorder, we ought to, you know, smack them in the face with reality all the time. That definitely is not the best approach. But what we also can't do is enforce in the world that everyone has to adopt whatever delusion anyone else says. Right? If I start running around saying I'm a poached egg, I can't, it's inappropriate for me to then expect everyone else to pretend like I'm a poached egg. That's not how the world works. All right? And by the way, there's a certain level on which everyone knows this, even those people who are, you know, transgender or homosexual or lesbian or whatever. They know that something's different here, that something isn't quite right. And in fact, that's why they're so determined to make sure everyone else accepts and adopts their way of thinking. You know, it's not enough that everyone says, look, if you really feel that way and you're not bothering anyone, go off and do your thing and you know, hey, you're a consenting adult. Go and do what you want to do along those lines, right? That's not enough, okay? It's only enough when everyone, the whole of society, pats them on the back and affirms their perversion or their delusion. And that's the nature of sin. That's why Eve had to say to Adam, come and eat the apple. Right? Eve wasn't satisfied to eat the apple all alone, because one of the ways we try to alleviate guilt is by getting other people to buy into it too. Right? As if we think if enough people believe this lie, then maybe it'll be true. Right? Well, it doesn't matter. If everyone believes a lie, it's still a lie. Okay? And so we have got to stop the politically correct stupidity that says whatever delusion somebody is under, all of society has to adopt that same delusion, or we're being violent to them. Right? Sorry, that's not the way the world works. If you want to be different, and if you feel strongly that you are just totally different, be different. Right? It's a free country. But don't expect everyone else to do what you're doing and accept what you're doing. You're different, right? Look, I'm different than most of the people around me in all kinds of ways. And you know what? I could care less who likes it and who doesn't, right? Doesn't matter to me whatsoever, right? And so if you really want to be different, hey, be different. But don't try to get everyone else to accept your difference as good and right or even rational if it isn't. Okay? The last thing I have to say, and this is the most troubling of all of the points that I've made, is how we have to respond to this. All right? If you're a parent watching this, if you're a young person watching this, we have got to take a stand, and we have got to speak out about these issues and others, okay? And sadly, for whatever reason, I get that the pressure is strong, and the pressure to conform and use the accepted terms, and recently I was having a discussion with someone about medically assisted suicide or euthanasia, and I tried 3 or 4 different terms. I think first I said medically assisted suicide, and then I tried euthanasia, and then, whatever, and every time I would say a different term. I think I tried about 3 or 4, and they'd be like, well, that's not the term you're supposed to use now. Oh, well, let's do this. Well, that's not the term either. And finally I said, you know what, I don't care what the right term is. In fact, tell me what term is politically correct, and I'm going to make sure I never use it, because I hate being politically correct. Okay, I hate everything about that notion, that somehow we shouldn't say what's true because someone might be upset. Guess what? If it's true, you're going to have to deal with it whether I say it or not. Now, let's get back to what I was trying to say here, and that is the biggest problem and the most danger that is presented by the toxic culture in which we live is to those who are youngest. Right? I have 2 kids in elementary school. And I know that in elementary school, they're going to have teachers who mean well, but are just misguided, trying to tell them that, yeah, boys can marry boys. And if you feel like wearing a dress, maybe you're secretly a girl on the inside instead of a boy. Or if you're a girl who wants to wear pants, maybe you're secretly a boy on the inside. And you're not just a child who's naturally curious. Right? If your son wants to play with dolls, let him play with dolls. It'll make him a better dad. Right? Don't ask him whether or not he thinks he's a girl. Just tell him, if you've got a penis, you're a boy. Or vice versa. All right? But you're going to have this conversation with your kid at a younger age than you think. Okay? Because, as I said, by kindergarten, by grade 1, they're going to be exposed to these ideas in school, especially. We're fortunate to live in a pretty rural area. But if you live in a city, the incidence of running across progressive morons is much higher. Okay? And so you're going to have to teach your kids about this nonsense way earlier than you think you have to. And that is a sad discussion to have. And I can tell you, as a parent, I genuinely struggle with how I tell my kids on one hand to respect and listen to and adopt the things that their teachers are telling them because they're important. And I want them to learn how to read and write and do arithmetic. I want them to learn how to obey the rules of the school to keep them safe. I want them to learn all that, but I've also got to tell them there are some things where your teacher is completely insane and irrational, and you're going to have to ignore that. Right? That's an extremely difficult conversation to have with a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or even a 10-year-old. But as parents in this day and age, we've got to have it. Because if we don't, someone else is more than happy to have that conversation with your children about sexuality, about gender, about, even about race and about abortion, things that they don't have any business caring about yet, but someone is going to get to them and shove that nonsense down their throat, and it's scary and it's dangerous, and we're going to have to talk to our kids about it. And I would suggest not just talking to your kids about it, talk to your teens about it, talk to your neighbors about it, because there is this inundation in our society today with almost an obsession that we've got to get everyone to accept perversion and delusion, and it's not helpful. And so that's where I want to leave you. Thanks for watching. That was The View from the Pew.